Hello, my name is Yvonne. I'm from JK Lifestyle with Yvonne. Today we're meeting with Stuart Wood, and I wanted him to come on. He spent 17 years helping people overcome their fears and to face them. He also has worked with people to help them through difficult situations. So that's why I wanted him to come on today. And we'll be talking about narcissists. Hi, how are you today, Mr. Wood?
I'm very good. Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me onto your lovely show. I hope I can bring some wisdom.
I'm glad to have you. And you're all the way from England.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah. The middle of England, middle of the country, actually an area called the Midlands, which is if you put a pin sort of in the middle of England, you'll come to Derby, Nottingham, and Leicester, and I'm in that sort of area.
Okay. Today, I want you to talk about narcissists. I'm sure we've all come up against one or two of them during our lifetime. What is a narcissist?
A narcissist is a little bit like a car, in that if you say, cars have basic structural things that make them recognizable. So they usually have four wheels and a body and a windscreen. And narcissists are very similar, because although there are core elements that are common across all narcissists, they also come in a really, really wide spectrum, all shapes and sizes. So actually describing a narcissist is it's a category within the Diagnostic Statistical Manual 5 of the American Psychiatric Society.
Mm-hmm.
And there are specific requirements that you need to be a narcissist. So there's actually about 8 or 9 characteristics that people include as a narcissist. So it's not a single entity.
Mm-hmm.
It's a personality disorder, and therefore it covers quite a wide range of different things, and you don't have to have them all. But for example, narcissists are highly entitled, so they feel as though they are number one. They have what we call a very grandiose sense of self. So what they feel about themselves, or what they project about themselves, is that they are super cool, super intelligent, the best at everything, etc. So they have this persona which is quite arrogant at times. They love to have attention. They love to be the center of attention. The sort of determining or the defining characteristics of narcissists, though, is that we need to sort of just clarify a little bit. The term narcissist is bandied around a lot. So I might be rude to you and you say, oh, you're a narcissist. And whilst rudeness and lack of appreciation for the other person is a trait of narcissism, just because someone is rude or doesn't acknowledge your point of view doesn't make them a narcissist. Narcissists need to have at least 6 out of the 9, or 5 or 6 out of the 9 of these characteristics that are set out about grandiosity and entitlement. What we do find is that narcissists are consistent with everybody, that the whole world exists for the narcissist, basically. So they lack empathy. If I was the narcissist and you were my victim, you would be here solely for my benefit. So how I treated you, how I thought about you, the kinds of things that I did to you, said to you, would actually mean nothing to me as long as I was getting from you what I needed, which is attention, In some cases, it's being put on a pedestal, being told how great I am. You know, sometimes it's telling me that I'm the most intelligent person in the room, this kind of thing. So narcissism is actually, it's more of a collection of different personalities tied up in one person, but it's characterized by this sense of grandiosity, this sense of specialness, but it's also characterized by a lack of empathy. So narcissists have no ability to assess how the other person is feeling, and they have no ability really to assess how they're feeling, or to consider their own responses, for example. So they are, if you imagine a narcissist as being like almost like a little machine gun tower, when you get too close, the bullets are flying out all the time to keep you away, but at the same time they're sat there with a big hoover sucking everything that they need: attention, adulation, sense of purpose, sense of importance, etc., from everything and everybody that's around them.
What makes a person become a narcissist? Are they born that way, or is it experiences that they go through growing up?
It's quite a contentious issue, but what people acknowledge is that your upbringing from being born through childhood is a very strong influencer on whether you become a narcissist. So if you were looking for a typical scenario or situation that the narcissist comes from, you'd think of someone, perhaps a child who's grown up without having the love of parents. They've grown up being set continually impossible standards to achieve, and continually impossible targets to hit. So they've never felt good enough, and eventually this kind of just messes around with their brain to the extent that their body kind of goes, right, I've had enough of this. I'm going to actually now, I'm not going to accept any more of this. And so what happens is that they become incredibly defensive, and they actually create what we call a false persona. So they create a mask or an image that other people see of what they want people to see, but that image doesn't reflect who they really are inside. So they may come across as being very brash, very, bluff. We all know these kinds of people, they seem confident, but actually inside their sense of self-worth is really, really small. So they're very, very insecure, but they have to compensate and make everyone else think that they're okay.
Mm-hmm.
There are also narcissists who are not so bluff and not so big and bold, and they're more what I would call more sneaky and more underhand in their ways. So typically males are this sort of grandiose, big narcissist more than female. But actually, when it gets to the covert variety, the kind that don't make a big song and dance, but actually still have their toxicity, but they do it by subtle ways, usually by getting at people, undermining people in front of their friends, undermining people behind their back, that kind of thing. Then they sort of work in a different way, but the cause of that is definitely upbringing. The interesting thing is that if you come from a really deprived background, for example, it doesn't automatically determine that you are going to become a narcissist. There are many people who come up from that kind of background who react in the sense of, I'm not going to put up with this anymore. I'm not going to let this damage me. And they really work hard to find out who they are, and they overcome that. But some of those children that grow up in that situation will become narcissists. The flip side is that you find people who are, particularly children, who get everything they want. And this may either just be an ignorant parent who doesn't appreciate the damage they're doing, or quite often parents who don't have time for their children will overindulge their children with material gifts and money and this kind of thing to make up for what they don't give them. And those children as well can also become narcissists because they have this massive entitlement, but they've never really been able to make proper decisions for themselves where someone's challenged them and said no. So these people, narcissists, also tend to be very fragile when they're confronting a different opinion to their own. So that what I would describe as the internet mentality, which is either you love me or you hate me. There's nothing in between. That's a very narcissistic view. Narcissists grow up with this impression and with this picture that people can only be good or bad. They can't be both. And so if they think you're bad, which they will, because the only person who's good is themselves, even though they're not, you're going to be on the receiving end of them trying to take advantage of you and get from you what they need. So its upbringing has a lot. Genetics might play a part because there is a lot of evidence where you have generational narcissism. So, you'll see it passed on down the families, whether that's actually pure genetics or whether it's just that they're in that right environment that enables certain genes to be expressed, their aggressive genes or selfish genes to be more strongly expressed. That's under a lot of discussion, but the cause of narcissism primarily is kind of the inappropriate nurture, but also nature and genetics can play a part in that.
Yeah, it seems like a person has either too little or too much. They have
inconsistent. Well, I think in some ways it's the fact that these children, as with any child, are looking for love, affirmation. They're looking to be accepted. They're looking to create their own identity. And yet a narcissistic parent sees their child as an extension of themselves. They're a sort of mini me, a mini narcissist. And then, from the narcissist perspective, that child doesn't have their own opinions, can't have that own opinions, because the child is firstly there to serve the narcissistic parent, but also the parent can gain a lot of attention from their child. If their child is interpreted as a genius or a prodigy or a natural talent, it's not about the child enjoying that. From the narcissist perspective, that all reflects the glory onto him or her. They're the ones that see that as the big, some big gift or entitlement that they've got. All the child is interested in and initially is enjoying life, being a child, but eventually they learn that nothing is unconditional, and so everything they do becomes subject to a specific condition. You're good enough if you do well at school. You're good enough if you give me lots of attention and hugs, but don't expect that in return because you're not going to get it.
Okay. How can you spot a narcissist? Say, for instance, if you're in the work environment, because I'm sure they're everywhere, in the work environment, in a personal relationship, in a family relationship, any place you go where you're around a group of people, how would you spot that narcissist?
First of all, it is very difficult because, as I've mentioned before, narcissists have this false persona, and so when they are in the presence of other people, they will project the image that they want those people to see. And so initially in a group of people, you may notice someone who's a little bit more charismatic, someone who's a bit more bombastic, someone who's a bit more withdrawn and shy, but none of these things on their own are indicators of narcissism. Where they really become visible is their long-term impact. because narcissists can't develop relationships with other people. They certainly can't develop any depth of relationship with other people. And the relationships that they have are all one way. It's all about take and not about give. And the narcissist, being fragile inside, when they are challenged or when their perceived ego, their status or whatever is being challenged, they can't handle that, because that's then forcing them to look at themselves as being anything but perfect, which they can't handle. And so what you find in these relationships is that someone might be either very quiet or very loud, but they're prone to outbursts of rage, for example. So from nowhere, someone will say something insignificant, and either the person will go off on one, explode into rage, or they'll just go incredibly quiet and lock themselves away and not talk to people for a long time. So spotting the narcissist per se is not always easy. It's more about spotting changes in behaviors and changes in people around them. So because a narcissist will continually change their mind, they have this thing called gaslighting, which is gaslighting really is just a technique used by narcissists to mentally and emotionally manipulate somebody else. But how gaslighting works is that the narcissist causes the other person to doubt their own reality. So you might say, well, Stuart, that shirt looks a nice blue. And I might, as a narcissist, I might say, no, that's yellow. And you'd say, no, it doesn't matter what it looks to you, it's yellow. Even in the presence of evidence to the contrary, a narcissist will insist on their point of view. And so what happens is you find that around them, people become emotionally unstable, they doubt their own worth, but also they learn not to trust. And so whereas in a healthy relationship, you have good communication, you have a healthy relationship, and you have plenty of trust, narcissism undermines all of those three pillars. And so you have shallow or no communication. There is shallow or no real relationship. Communication is quite often on a needs only basis, or it's not particularly clear, particularly if the narcissist is communicating to you. They will often contradict themselves, maybe even in the same sentence. But the whole impact is destabilizing that group of people. And so where you start to see in a work situation, for example, a team that becomes dysfunctional, or you see a group of people that hive themselves away from the rest of the office, that might be either for protection, or it might be that they've decided that their narcissistic leader or colleague is special and they follow them, and therefore they protect the narcissistic leader. So you get what I sometimes call posses or silos. You get the individual groups that separate themselves away, or you get groups that suddenly rally behind this controversial character, or a character who might come out with things which are really quite hurtful, etc. But people then make excuses for them, saying, oh, he's just having a bad day, or that's just the way he is, because that allows the narcissist as well to evade any responsibility or accountability.
Do they ever interact with, or do they ever try to get close to another narcissist? Or do they always try to have someone who they can victimize, who they can unsettle?
Yes. Yeah. Yes, it does happen, because although narcissists are brilliant at reading the room and seeing in other people things that they want, or seeing in other people traits that those people have got which serve the narcissist's needs, the other person who is a narcissist may at that point be putting on a mask, and may be saying, oh, look how compassionate I am, look how gentle I am, look how supportive I am. And the narcissist will still lock into that as a potential supply. So you do get narcissistic relationships. It's just interesting when with any narcissistic relationship, it starts off as better than Disneyland. You know, it's all, everything's perfect. They're the perfect, it's a match made in heaven. As a partner, they're just the person you've always been looking at, because what they will do is reflect back to you what you want to hear. And so then it creates the image that you found the ideal person. So in early narcissistic relationships of narcissists with narcissists, that kind of thing still goes on. And narcissists are not that wise to identifying their own patterns. They can't self-analyze. But at some at some stage, the lid is going to blow off. And then it's really a battle of who is the most narcissistic.
Do you think narcissists are the same as toxic people? Would you put them in that same type of category?
It's interesting. It's one of those things. All narcissists are toxic, but not all toxic people are narcissists.
Yeah.
So we have, as a, human beings have that side where if we've had a bad day, we may be unusually aggressive, we may be rude, we may demand our own way, etc. But that's a one-off or two-off event. It's a short-term event. And quite a lot of people who are toxic have generally got into this cycle where they've lost the ability to check on themselves. But if someone pulls them to one side, like if they're inappropriate in a meeting and the boss pulls them on one side and says, that wasn't appropriate because what you said made people feel like this, even a toxic person might say, oh, I'm sorry, I hadn't realized that. And they can then correct their behaviors. The problem is that when you become sufficiently toxic that it passes over onto the narcissistic spectrum, then a sort of pathological, dangerous narcissistic spectrum, then if you were to challenge the narcissist and say, what you said has just really upset the meeting, etc., they would immediately go on the offensive. They would be very defensive, and they would either make themselves out to the victim. Oh, you're always picking on me. Why do you make? I'm there doing my best, and yet you always make me seem bad, and I feel really bad now, and you always hurt me. So they can quickly turn it round from being the aggressor to being the victim. But also sometimes when they're challenged, they will just go into denial or lack of empathy. Well, that's their problem. It's not mine. If they're not tough enough to deal with me, then, I can't do anything about it. So you do notice them throwing away any responsibility and accountability, and also placing the blame, placing the onus on other people to change. So narcissism is something that it's like at the really toxic end of toxicity, but not all toxic people are narcissists.
You know what I was just thinking too, like that example you gave, if someone is at a meeting and they say something, and those two scenarios that you said could take place, one could apologize, the other one could deny responsibility. But what about the person, depending on who's saying that to them? If it's someone that they know have the ability to make their life uncomfortable, I think maybe they would probably try to deny it or play innocent. And then when they know that they have to get along with this person or else it's to their detriment, they'll put on that, what you were saying before, they put on that face that's Vascade. Okay, I'm thanks for telling me, Joe. But then they'll wait until the next opportunity that they could get away with it. They'll do the same thing. That's
Yes,
what I believe.
that's a really good image of the narcissist, because the narcissist is, sees everybody else as there for their advantage. One thing they're incredibly good at finding is people who can help them up that ladder, as you say, help them up the steps, help them progress to having bigger income, having more possessions, being more important in the community, having more status within the company, that kind of thing. But there is still the interesting thing with narcissists is because they can't always self-reflect on what happens. Initially, they may respond to a big boss or someone who's in a significant position by kowtowing and saying, "Oh no, you're right." But even in that situation, there's a whole load of blame that the narcissist can't take on board. So if they play up to the manager, and again, I think you alluded to this, they'll buzz off somewhere else and they'll make jolly sure that people who are below them or people they think are below them suffer for their own inadequacies. I've been caught out, therefore it's your fault. It's not. There's never that stopping with, it's me. It's my fault. That's not going to happen. The only time a narcissist will admit responsibility is if it makes them look better.
What about in a relationship? What's it like to be in love with a narcissist?
They call it crazy making, and that's probably the best way of describing it, because we've already said that the healthy relationship is based on good communication, a deep relationship, and trust, and all of those things are two-way. When you start out in a relationship with the narcissist, they are very astute and very tuned into what you want, so they can give you that. And a narcissistic, there's a thing called a narcissistic cycle, which starts off with this thing of, the in term is love bombing. It basically means that the narcissist will shower their love interest with gifts, with money, ridiculous things, lots and lots spend loads of time together and make that person feel really, really special and really important, because all the time they're finding the intel, they're doing the reconnaissance to find out how they can really tap from this person the thing the narcissist needs. You then go into an area where the narcissist, for no apparent reason, you fall from grace. And it's more often than not, the victim has no idea what's happened, but suddenly the narcissist will take those characteristics that they have been, admiring and adoring their love partner for, and they take those things and use them as weapons against that partner. They undermine them. They say, "Oh, I hate it when you do that." So at one minute, this person is doing something and being admired for it. The next minute, that very same thing they're admired for, they're being undermined for. And at that, brain is incapable of, it's called cognitive dissonance. It's a horrible term, but it just basically means that the thinking part of your brain can't handle these two opposite extremes, and it puts stress on your body. And so what happens is that when the narcissist does this often enough, they'll get you to a point of being feeling really insignificant, feeling unsure, and then suddenly they'll come back and start giving you gifts again if they think they're going to lose you to get you back, and then they invalidate you again. And so we have a cycle that goes round and round, which basically just screws up the emotional and mental state of the victim. So living with a narcissist, one of the best way to describe this was a friend of mine who I've known her and her husband for 15 years or so. And it was only when she was talking to me one day that it came out that what she was talking about as normal in their marriage was anything but. So he had all the money. She had to be very careful with what she said. As long as she was looking after the house and doing a thing, she was fine. But he had children from another marriage, particularly one daughter who was sort of in his image, shall we say. And if she ever made any attempt to criticize this daughter, she was, she would be on the receiving end of verbal abuse and criticism and demeaning talk. But also he allowed this daughter to say to his wife whatever the daughter wanted to. And if she spoke and upset the daughter, it would be, oh, look what you've done to my daughter now. You've really upset her. You shouldn't have done. And so again, within that dynamic, all the fault, all the blame fell on the victim. And what that does is squashes any confidence. It actually is more so means that those people then doubt their own ability to make a decision. And so is they rely more on the narcissist for their advice, because they say, I can't make a decision on my own. The decisions I make are stupid, they're wrong, whatever. And therefore, I'm going to look to this abuser, although they would never call them an abuser. I'm going to look to my partner, if you like, for the advice that I need. And so they get this learned helplessness where they're unable to make decisions. And as the stress gets worse, then you get all sorts of problems with memory loss and illness, headaches, stress headaches, gastrointestinal upsets, all those, typical stress reaction.
Do they ever break away from them? And then if they break away, how does the narcissist feel then?
Yes, they do. They do break away. And actually, if you look at how best to deal with a narcissist, the best way is to have absolutely no contact with them. So you cut off all contact, you give them no access to your social media, anything you had, you change everything, numbers, and you block them wherever possible so that they can't access you. Because the narcissist, it's quite ironic that the one person who gives them exactly what they want, because the victim, the person who's being abused isn't going out of their way to be nasty. They are genuinely and feel genuinely that they're in love at the beginning. And so they are genuinely doing the best for the narcissist. So the narcissist have got the best of both worlds, and yet that's still not good enough. And so what happens is that the narcissist eventually loses this source of adulation and praise. And as soon as that happens, then it kicks off all their insecurities. So in someone who leaves a narcissist, some people manage to leave, but the narcissist will stalk them, they will pursue them, they will continually, physical abuse is not uncommon. Some people, especially wives and girlfriends that have been in long-term relationships and where the narcissist is particularly, I'd call it clingy, but they've got their claws in deep and they have a very controlling relationship, actually losing the other part will trigger them into rage to the extent that they will murder. Not all narcissists are murderers, but certainly for people who escape narcissistic relationships, very often the most dangerous time is when they actually get away, because then suddenly the narcissist has no control over you or that situation. And that's when all their insecurities are exposed. They can't handle that. And you just get this massive rage that comes out where they just see blue, see black, whatever, and can't see red, all sorts of colors. But whatever they see, they can't control themselves.
Mr. Stuart Wood joined us today. We have to go now, but it's very interesting what you had to say today about narcissism and the narcissist. But I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I want to thank Mr. Wood for coming on. I truly appreciate it. And see you next time.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay.